Hi, my name is Maddie Hooper, and for my disability category presentation, I chose to research Angelman syndrome. So what is Angelman syndrome? It's a rare neurogenetic disorder that's caused by a loss of function of a particular gene that's called the UBE3A gene in the 15th chromosome, and it's usually derived from the mother. Common symptoms of Angelman syndrome include developmental problems that usually arise between 6 and 12 months. They frequently have walking and balancing problems, gastrointestinal issues, seizures, little to no speech, but an overall joyful personality that is contagious. Please read the brief history of Angelman syndrome on the next slide. The focus of my research when I was looking at my journal articles is going to look at the connection between Angelman syndrome and sleep. So sleep disorders are actually one of the most common problems associated with Angelman syndrome, and my research articles stated that about 20 to 80% of people that have Angelman syndrome also have a sleep disorder. My first article looked at the current research on sleep and Angelman syndrome from a more holistic perspective. People with Angelman syndrome have a reduced need for sleep, trouble falling asleep, and awake frequently during the night. EEG abnormalities were present in one study done, and parent and caregivers were given various studies which provided more inconsistent results. So what's interesting is the research is a little bit unclear as to whether lack of sleep in people with Angelman syndrome affects their daytime alertness. It looked like only about 40 to 20% of the population would say that it affected their daytime alertness. However, poor sleep quality in children with Angelman syndrome is associated with insomnia and a decrease in the daytime alertness for their parents. This was what my second journal article was all about. So according to a study published in 2017, parents attending an Angelman syndrome conference were invited to interview about their child's sleep, and 94% of parents reported that their child's sleep difficulties had at some point affected them, and that looked like daytime fatigue, sleep deprivation, having stress, or difficulties coping at work. Next, we're going to look at the various treatments that have been used to treat sleep disorders in Angelman syndrome. Behavioral therapy is usually the first line of defense. My third research article was specific to the study on the effect of a behavioral intervention therapy program on children with AS. The children with AS were placed in two groups, a control group and also a group that underwent intense behavior therapy. And overall, the behavioral intervention therapy proved successful in improving sleep time and reducing waking after sleeping. The second option for treatment of sleep disorders in people that have Angelman syndrome is medication. And the medications that are often used are melatonin, antidepressants, and antihistamines, all of which have proven effective in increasing sleep quality in people with Angelman syndrome. It was noted in the research, though, that the data is limited due to small sample sizes and not a lot of people and researchers replicating these studies. The third option of treatment involves precision therapy, and there are several treatments that are undergoing clinical trials at the moment to treat sleep disorder in people with Angelman syndrome, including introducing a more functional copy of the UBE3A gene or the reactivation of a silenced but still functional UBE3A copy on the paternal allele. So all of that fancy wording basically just means that there's research on gene editing for people with Angelman syndrome and sleep disorders. So most of my websites that I used in my research had to do with instructional strategies for Angelman syndrome, so we're going to look at that next. So I focused my instructional strategies primarily on the categories of communication and cognition, since those seem to be the two primary areas of weakness for people with Angelman syndrome. So looking at communication, students with Angelman syndrome definitely benefit from the use of AAC devices to meet their daily communication needs. A lot of aided language input systems, such as a light text symbol display or a speech generating device, can be effective strategies to increase communication. And one that I had not particularly heard about is one called Pragmatically Organized Dynamic Display, or POD, which are books that organize visual symbols pragmatically and are designed to be used across language partners and settings, so they can be used at home or at school. And then people with Angelman syndrome are often socially motivated, so we as teachers can use that to our advantage by reinforcing or trying to explain to these students how this can benefit them in different social settings. So next we're going to look at cognition and some instructional strategies to help these students that do have intellectual delays. So studies on Angelman syndrome with mice reveal that the cognitive deficits involved in this particular disability have to do with storing and retrieving information from memory. So when we're looking at instructional strategies, repetition can be a very helpful resource, repeating lessons, reinforcing, and all of that. And then also incorporating multisensory experiences can be super helpful for students with Angelman syndrome. A couple other just very practical resources would be visual schedules, making sure we're activating background knowledge for these students prior to a lesson, using motivating books and writing prompts for these kiddos. And then lastly, because there are some gross motor delays, we will have to support their fine motor aspect when we're looking at subjects like writing especially. So alternative pencils can be used just to support that area of need. So the community resource that I looked like for people with Angelman syndrome is called Extra Special People, or ESP. So the mission statement that I got from their website says that ESP exists to create transformative experiences for people with disabilities and their families, changing communities for the better. So Extra Special People serves children and young adults with behavior disorders, CP, Down syndrome, autism, fetal alcohol syndrome, and Angelman syndrome, as well as several other developmental disabilities. And they have 3 locations, one in the Atlanta, Rome, and Athens areas. And they have 3 primary programs to serve these people that have developmental disabilities. One is called Java Joy, and it's a mobile coffee cart that employs people with disabilities. Super cool. And then 360 is another program that's year-round, and it involves a lot of recreation and sports programs, including Miracle League, which I'm pretty familiar with, and I'm sure a lot of you are, summer camps, and they also really seek to help families, and that includes having like family dinners after some of these recreation programs. And then the last program is called Hooray, and it's ESP's summer camp for people with developmental disabilities. And actually a lot of these programs, these summer camps are about to begin since we're in the summertime now. And then I just wanted to highlight a couple of upcoming events that they have going on too. On June 24th, they have an event called Big Ball for All. And from my research, it looked like that was a golf tournament, and they involve some celebrities from either the baseball or football worlds to come together and put on this tournament, and all of the proceeds go to this ESP organization. And then the last one that's upcoming is October 27th, and it's Big Jump, and it's a skydiving competition, which is super cool. And again, all proceeds go to ESP. So I just want to thank you guys so much for listening to my presentation on Angelman syndrome. I hope you learned something. I'm going to end with a couple of discussion questions for you guys to review and think about. Number 1, just briefly recall some characteristics of Angelman syndrome. Number 2, precision therapy was mentioned as a way to treat Angelman syndrome, which involves gene editing. What ethical considerations should be taken into account when exploring these technologies? And how does it relate to the notion that a disability can be quote-unquote fixed? Number 3, how do the instructional strategies presented compare or contrast to known strategies used with students with autism or other developmental disabilities? And my last question, Given the unique challenges faced by parents of children with Angelman syndrome, how can we as special educators come alongside them in order to relieve some stress experienced by many families?